Hi and welcome to Watercolor with Sonia. Today we're going to do some really misty clouds in a scene from Alaska. This was on the way up to Juneau, and we're going to try and capture those elusive clouds in between the mountains that are all fogged out and some of this blue icy water. So the first thing I'm going to use is, I've got it here, is Phthalo Turquoise, but it's actually in this particular tube. It says Phthalo Turquoise, but I believe it's just Phthalo Blue green shade, because it seems to just come out in that same very staining color. Not any greener, not any bluer, although it does say PB16 as opposed to PB15. So just by adding a little bit of yellow to your Phthalo Blue green shade, you can definitely have the same color. We're going to then, and if you don't have that, then I recommend a little bit of cobalt with a little bit of yellow, or even just if you happen to have turquoise. It's just the water that we want, the iciness to it. So here we go. I am going to start by mixing up some color here so you can see. This is the Phthalo Turquoise. And just so that you can see the Phthalo Turquoise compared to the Phthalo Blue, I really don't see a difference. Okay, so that's why I'm saying I think you're safe in using the Phthalo Blue green shade. But we'll need the darker colors, which I'm going to use a little bit of Sap Green and maybe some Alizarin Crimson to get almost a gray, a darker green, very much like an emerald green. I could also use the Phthalo Turquoise with the Alizarin Crimson. So those are the colors I'm going to use, and a little bit of maybe Cadmium Yellow, just maybe a slight bit of Cadmium Yellow. Okay, so the first thing is, you see my drawing here. A lot of these mountains will not show up, but I wanted to put them in so you could actually see that there are shapes here. So in an environment like this where you want really the haziness and the softness to come out, having all these lines isn't going to really serve you much. So, but I wanted to guide your eye for the tracing if you didn't draw it yourself. So now what I'm going to do is actually erase these, or at least lighten them up to the point where you can almost not see them. But was the idea that you could actually have a better chance of understanding where some of these areas on the mountaintops were, because we'll even add just a hint of warm yellow in there. It shows up on my screen as kind of like a hint of almost raw sienna. So maybe I'll just drop in a little bit of raw sienna in my upper area. I'm going to soften the lines all over here too, but not quite as strongly, so that you can still see what I was doing here. Okay, here we go. So you almost see nothing now in the paper. And hopefully, as I start to paint, you're going to see a development. Now, one of the things I hardly ever use anymore is my hake brush. And I was using it the other day, so I thought, oh, why not try this big one again, just so you can see it. So what this does is just washes water down on the paper and gives a nice even glaze all the way across with water. So I have a nice, soft, watery glaze that's going to soak into my paper. My paper is the student quality Fabriano, which is 25% cotton, the rest is cellulose, but it has it does a good job with playing with different colors and techniques. We're going to need to have a Q-tip, we're going to need to have some tissue, and a brush that is has a little bit more bristle and a little more synthetic, so that it's got a little bit grip to it, because we're going to lift as well to get some of these whites back. So now, having said all that, I'm just going to put my paint back here. And this is actually a good one too, because this has a really good stiff top to it. We'll start first. Usually we start with the lightest color. So I mentioned a little bit of my raw sienna. So I thought, you know what, let's do that. Let's just take a little bit, mix it up, make it really light. And I'm going to drop it in. I see this little bit, it's like almost like a smog coming through here a little bit. in a couple of these areas, just below the tree line there. Okay, so that's too strong, but what I want to do is just soften it up and haze it up so it's just lingering in there, but not much. Okay. And then I'm going to take, so we've got a little bit of that feel to that, and I'm going to even take my tissue and just dab it out a bit so it's not so even. Okay, our first layer. I didn't see any of that in the water, so I'm going to leave the water plain. Now, the next stage would be, let's start with the Phthalo Turquoise. I've got green in here now. How did I get the green? So I'm going to remix the Phthalo Turquoise. Now there's water in here, and there's water on here. So I could use a bigger brush, but I'm going to start with just a nice light brush going across here. And the water goes right up to this line in here. So then I've got it slightly tilted, so I just want to take that line and continue it along with my brush, so I don't have any lines particularly, because this is the first layer of the icy water. I haven't had to make much in the way of wash because I have a lot of water that my brush holds, and this is going to be lighter down here, so we're kind of almost doing a graduated wash all the way across. Okay, that's the first layer on that end. Now, you do see a little bit of lighter area in here. It's kind of grayish. Just tidying up my lines here. So that's a bit of rock formation. And behind here is the next layer of the trees. I can even bring that nice light coloring up right into here. And even bring it up behind here. And then we're going to soften it before we forget. Okay, so there's a little bit. So the first, when I say soften, you could take a brush and just soften with a little bit more water. Okay. You can also then take a brush like this, and having your tissue with you, you could go in and you could lift a little bit with a dry brush and come in and lift and lift. Okay. Now that's pretty light. So I'm going to just go once over across here because I'm noticing there's some breaks in that area. All right, fine, we've got that. So our next one, if we want to do the same thing, is up in here in the mountain area, we have a break in here that looks very much like a little bit of green, light green, okay? So I've put a little bit of blue there, and then below that, there's the tree line. You know what? I've just gone through the snow, or the fog of the, so I've got to take that out. It's up here, actually, up above there. So let's get a little bit of blue so you can see right above here. Okay. So a little bit of that mountain area is popping out there. And what I'm going to do now is take a little bit of Q-tip and just soften it all up. Okay, now it's not the right color. I want it a little bit greener, so I'm going to go back in with my Sap Green, and now that's too light. I want it a little bit darker. So the way I can do that is take Alizarin Crimson, take my Phthalo Blue, mix them together, and I'm going to get a darker blue, and I can add that in here, and I'm going to get that darkish green color, which eventually I want for all my areas. Now that's too dark, so we're just going to dab it with the tissue to get that feeling, and it seems too much of an edge, so we're going to take a wet brush and we're just going to soften that wet brush and push it up a little bit to make it look like the clouds are falling down and up. Okay, so now the next one to do is just below that area right in here, and I've got some mist right along this side. And then I have very dark clouds that are coming here, and then I have mist around the rest of the area. Okay, so I could go in with my mixture. Let me just go in here, right up in here. And there are mists around the trees there, so don't go into the trees. So just gonna relay this just down here a little bit. Try and get to that mountain edge. And it kind of comes down along that mountain edge. Well, I need more water. It's already getting too dry. So I'm just going to take my water and put that across there. Now I'm going to take that sap green that I had and just apply a little bit more in there and then dab it out again to get that misty greenery. Now it's a bit too light, so I'm going to go back in with a bit more dark. And when I say light, I mean the green is a bit too bright for what I really want. And I can bring it down here a bit, where that's, and I find that still a little too greenish, so I'm going to come back in and make a darker color with a Phthalo Blue and my Alizarin Crimson. I'm just going to, that's it, that's more of the color we're looking for, a little bit grayer. Okay, now that's too dark for that area. Let's see if I can get it to make it look a little bit more like it's supposed to. Okay, and then dabbing it again. So we've got enough interaction between there. I think we're going to be good there. The next area is that area down here that I actually had started a little bit. I'm going to add just more of that color in here, just lights, bits of light along there. And keep some of those whites because the fog kind of goes through, so I'm just going to just dab it down and let it just, I'm going to add a little water here and just start to let it blend together. You can lift too if you find that you haven't been able to keep the whites as much. Okay, just trying to soften the edges, make it look more realistic. There's even a little bit more up here. So I'll take just a little bit more color and pop it up here a bit, just a bit, and then I'll soften it again with the tissue. Okay, and so then there's a nice misty area in here, and it does have a little bit of hint of color, so we can take that little bit of greenish gray that we've got in here and just pop that in like that. Comes around to here. And then it comes up there. So I'm just going to add that a little bit. Now I'm going to take my brush and soften it up. And I'm even going to come now in and just dab it a bit with the tissue. Okay. And some of that mist was there, but it's a little bit greener, a little bit darker here. Right in here, like that. You kind of see the trees up there, but not really. Okay. And I could take that all the way down, but just to help myself that I'm remembering where everything is, I can even darken this a little bit. I'm just going to get a little more green in there. A little bit of blue. A little bit of red. Whoops, wrong red. This will change it to brown here. Going to get that right red there. There we go. Now we got it. Now we got a nice dark green. Okay. So let me show you that dark green because I can bring it just underneath here where these trees were. So there's a mist in here, and just very carefully with the side of your brush, you could use a flat brush too, you're going to bring in a little bit and add some of those trees in here. And they had a few tops that kind of went up. There's a bit of more gap than I'm doing, so try and put a little bit more gap in there. And I'm going to add just a bit more of that dark color in a couple places. Now that's a bit edgy there at the base. So what I'm going to do is now take my brush and just soften that right up. I could use a Q-tip for this too, but I need a little water here before I can do that. So I could take the Q-tip now, and if I needed to, just soften those lines out completely. Okay. I'll come back in and maybe add a little bit more dark later. Just soften that all up. Okay. So that is one mist area. I'm noticing that there was just a little darker in here. I'm just going to add just a bit of that color since I've got it. Okay. So let's concentrate now on the dark areas. But this is a little bit lighter that I had in here. So why don't we do this first to make it easier on ourselves. I'm going to darken this a bit more with my Alizarin Crimson. More blue and a little bit more Sap Green. A little bit more Alizarin Crimson. I'm back to a grayish brown again, so I need a little more blue. Okay, this is looking promising. I could have used just yellow in adding to this, but Sap Green is a safer bet for those of you who aren't used to mixing. All right, let's make that wet first. Just going to wet my brush and put that all along here. And we're going to come in and from the top and just add that color in. And slowly bring it down. I made it very wet, so it's nicely been soft, and I haven't had to worry. I can come in with a little more color, but it's just going to mix around, so just be prepared for that. And there's some really nice trees in this area, and this is pretty dry up above there, so it'll make a nice set of tree tops. But I have to remember to think about the shape. Lighter in here, and then it kind of mists out, so you could put little just dabs of color in there to make it look kind of, now I just went down a little too far, bring that up a bit. Okay, a little bit more mist coming through here, and then it gets a little darker over on this side, and I'm trying to keep it just above that pencil line. Alright, so let's go back in now, add a little bit more Phthalo Blue to this to get it a little darker. That's probably too dark, but let's just add in a little bit more color in there. Eventually that comes just down below here, and I'm going to just add a little water in this area here, just along here. And we'll get just a similar kind of greenish tinge over the water. Okay, I'm going to leave it like that with that little bit of dry brushing. Since I have that beautiful color right now, I'm going to re-wet this area in here. And I'm going to leave some of that blue edge just along there. And I'm going to bring the water just into this line along here where it kind of forms the mountaintop. And I'm going to bring that same color that I just had and just pop it in here while I've got it. There's just a little bit at the base there. We'll re-darken this in a bit. There are the little bit of streaks that kind of come out here slightly that you can pull out. Even here a bit. And it's even dark down here, so without the water added, I'm just going to do a little bit of dry brushing to give that feeling of those waves that you see there. Okay, so we're going to leave that now. I can come back in and add a bit more of that color in here. Try and keep those treetops. And then soften it by pushing the side of the brush a little bit. Okay, so that's coming out fairly well. Now if I find that afterwards I'm not happy because it's all too heavy in here and not enough mist, I can come in with that tissue again, or my Q-tip or my brush, and when it's dry. I'm going to come back in over here and just add a bit more color into the tree there. And same thing. I'm seeing quite a bit of dark down here, just kind of like a valley there. Maybe a little bit more tree line in that area. So we'll leave it like that. Okay. Now that we've got that, we can actually go in and see some of that really light. I see some of that in here a little bit. So I'm going to take a little bit of that wash, add a little bit more Phthalo Blue, and try and get some of that, just that mist in here. Well, that's way too dark, right? So now we're just going to soften it up completely and then dab. Give me the impression there's a bit of valley with a little bit of mist following through. And even up here, I can do the same, just to get that feeling that there is that mountain happening in there. Okay. All right, so now we're on to our darkest area. So Phthalo Blue, right in there. A little bit of alizarin, giving us a dark blue, like an indigo almost. And then a little bit of the Sap Green. So now I've got a beautiful color, which I was going to test for you. I had the paper right here for that. And now it's disappeared. Let me just see. Here we go. Okay. So just to test it out, that's fairly good. I would add a little bit more Phthalo Blue just to darken it up, a little bit more alizarin too. Just get it a bit darker. We don't have to play around with it so much. This is the area that we're going to now work on in here. So I can keep it dry. It's all dry in here. Just be prepared that because it's dry, you need to have more mixture and more water ready in the brush. Another way to do it would be to start over on this end and work just a little bit here to see how you like, because there's that grayish area there. So you could try the darkness here, use it around the grays that were in the snow, in the stone. And you could bring it back a bit up here. There's a little bit more gray area in there, and I'll get some grays in there in a minute, just to see how that's adapting here. Okay, so I want to have more fluid marks here, so let's just go across, right across here. And once more. Now this, as you can see, because my brush is quite full of paint, I can do it. But if I didn't have that, it would be very difficult. So it's up to you if you want to wet the paper ahead of time or not. I'm just trying to see here now what some of these rock formations are. Okay. So we're going to come up to the area just above here and just add that little bit more up there, in here. Okay. So I have to soften all of that up and make it look, because there's actually a couple of different lines. It just looks like just a little line. Now, what my problem is, my trees aren't very good with the line. Okay. Too even. A little more there. All right. So I'm going to come back down here now and reapply another layer. Because this is wet on wet, it's difficult to do. I should let it dry and then do a glaze, because then I'll get a really nice dark. I don't like this area. It should go up a bit more up here, like that. Give it a little variation, because there's a bit of a valley there. All right, I don't have any more paint. I got to recreate my paint. I should definitely have made way more. Okay, let's try again. Okay, that's lovely. So I'm going to go up here now on the top mountain area and just add that same color in. It comes down, it comes right down in there. There's a few trees in there. It's really dark right now, so I've got to be careful. There's a little bit more of a mistiness to it. Let's go in and let's add that down here. And it's really dark right along the edge here. Okay. I will add a little bit more blue later, but I just want to go in and just add a few trees. And they're not quite... Better would be a little tiny brush. Let's bring my tiny brush in. And just get them to look like a little bit more like tree. And even in here, I could add a bit more in there, right in here a bit. Here, that's not very good. Gotta get it looking more like a tree. Along there. And maybe just in there a bit more here. Because we've got the mists and everything. Oh, and this area is not looking quite, it's looking too choppy. So I'm going to soften that up completely and make it look more like it's in the mist. Now, if you're finding that your trees don't look like trees and it's too much of a unevenness there, you can also come in and lift a little bit and push some of that color up there to make it look more like the mist is coming in. Get a little bit more of that color in there. All right, and if you still don't like that choppiness, it's to go in with the Q-tip and just try and push it out a bit. Even here is just a bit too dark, so I'm going to go back in. I need to wet the Q-tip this time to be able to get that to soften a bit. It comes back in here a bit more. There was even just a bit more of a mist in there, and here's where I would just take the brush and try and lift. I have to clean my little brush here, and I would try and lift that out a little bit more here. And go in with a tiny tissue. Be careful though, you don't want too much coming out. Okay, so that's very green along these areas because of the sap green. So I could go back in with my Phthalo Blue carefully, but it has to be drier, and then I can add a little bit more blue if I want to. I could also add a little bit more Alizarin Crimson right over top to get it into even more of a dark grayish almost. Here, let's just put the Alizarin Crimson there so you can see what happens. It changes color immediately to a darker kind of mixture of purples and greens. So pre-mixing it might be the way to go if you want even darker coloring. And I'm just looking here how much darker, if anything. No, it's fine. So now the gray, easiest way to make the gray is to make a purple out of the blue and the red, and then just add a wee bit of yellow with a different brush. Carefully, carefully, because you're trying to not contaminate the yellow. It's still a bit green. I would add a bit more red. And there's our gray. A little bit more yellow. Okay. And that gray is just applied kind of a darkish right in there. We can even bring it in along the edge of the water and pretend that there's that just a little bit of reflection of the rocks that are in there. Watch that it is dry enough because I'm getting a little bit of greenery, the blue mostly coming in there. I'll let that just come up right here, there. And I could even carry it a little bit more right across. Okay, we'll let that dry. Hopefully that won't get too much running through. And I'm just looking now, is there anything we want to still do with the grays? Because we can take a little bit of the gray, we can make it a little bit more blue-gray. Just adding a little bit more of that blue back in. And you can add a little bit of gray into the upper area of the sky if you wanted to. What do you have to do first? You have to actually wet the area first. Don't not wet it. Okay, so if you wet the area and you add in just a bit like that, immediately go back in and start softening it. I'm just going to take my water and just soften that a bit. And now come back in and really just get it, because you don't see a lot of it in there, so you just want to get that impression, right? Now I can do a little bit more in between here and then get that impression. Otherwise, don't do it if you're uncomfortable, because you could end up messing up. You don't want to have it too dark. Okay. Up here, just a little darker maybe. A little bit more of a hint. Gotta be careful, because you can get beautiful clouds that just have these hints of gray in there. You just don't see it in my image, so you have to be a little bit more creative, or already have played with a little bit of clouds to feel comfortable doing that. Okay, don't want to touch it any more beyond that. Just looking here to see. Now this particular line I could try and get out if it was really dry. At this point I definitely don't want to do that. But I do want to darken my, I'm going to lift those a bit. Don't like those greens in there. I'm going to get a little bit more blue, phthalo blue, into my water. I'm just trying to look. There is a bit more just out here, coming out a little bit in lines. A few places, but there's gaps in between. And I'm just trying to see here if there's any more areas of softness that I have to try and integrate to make it look more like there's a bit more mountain in there, or do I need a little bit more dark to make it look a little bit darker in the base. Definitely down here, but it's way too wet down here to make it darker. And I could certainly add just a little bit of line into some of the rock area. And down here at the edge of the water here, you could add a nice little line too. There's even one just below it too, just a hint of darkness there. And I don't know if I'm seeing it as a reflection in the water, or the way I took that there actually is a little bit of that reflection of the trees coming through in lines going down. But that's only if you want to do that, if you feel that you can capture that the way I'm seeing it. Here I don't see it. It's definitely too dark in some of these areas. I'm just going to add a little bit more dark right in here. Especially where that mountain area is up at the top here. Get that right in there and let that go. And there are some beautiful little V's that kind of come out. So try and maybe capture that with a little dry brushing slightly. It's a little too wet to do that. So I would let more of the imagination rather than trying to go over the top with the lines. Again, I'm going to come in here. There's a bit of mountain. I'm going to do a little bit of mountain valley here with a little bit of the gray. And then soften it up again with the tissue. Just to give you that hint. Here I think we've captured pretty well everything we want, not too much there. And we've got some layers here. We could do a little bit more of those trees just to get that feeling of not this round movement, but a little bit more of the actual shape. And again, I could come in a little darker, but it's way too wet right now to do any of that. I think we've captured it well here on this side. There are just little bits of traces of that mountain again, just coming down, which we tried to capture before. So the only thing would be to soften those lines up, really just try and get that as soft as possible. And then tissue again to just dab that down. Because we're always just trying to get that impression that there may be a little bit of a hint of those mountain peaks all the way along the Alaska area, along the coastal mountain range, the Cascade Mountain Range. I think that's the Cascade Mountain Range still. Okay, and there you have it. Your very icy straight coming towards Juneau. Just before we finish, I mentioned I was showing you that image and we had completed everything, but I noticed just at the base here that we could really do another dark line just below the rocks. And I'm just doing it with, again, with the Phthalo Turquoise coming in along the edge and just adding a little bit more of darkness there. And if you find that it's just not dark enough, again, if you go in with the alizarin and make it a darker blue, you can get that lovely dark blue there. You can add even a little bit more into here if you want to, just to get the feeling that there's really dark areas around there. But try and keep it a little lighter further down. In here, it was pretty much very light in this area. Again, that little bit of line along here if you wanted to, but I wouldn't do too much because it's still in the mist and in the lower area. And again, you can come back in and tidy up some of your lines if you needed to. Or you can wait till it's completely dry and soften it up again. All right, thank you.